Welcome once again to the Doubtest Man on the Planet podcast. And as usual, this is. Acts of racism have always been prevalent within the global community. The world is full of examples dating back from history before our time. But in today's world, we finally see the eruption of what happens when people have been abused for far too long and on too many occasions. For over a week now, riots in America and protests around the world have sprung up in relation to the death of George Floyd, the man who was choked to death by a Minneapolis police officer who forced his knee down upon his neck even while he was restrained and handcuffed, begging and pleading with the officer to get his knee off his neck, saying he couldn't breathe. The man passed away shortly after. Now, unfortunately, as we've seen in recent history, this is not an isolated case. This was not a one-off. It's been happening, and it's been happening regularly. Why is that? It's beyond sad, and it's beyond disgusting that George Floyd died that day. Unfortunately, this is an issue that has been going on for decades and decades and centuries. And finally, we are able to see why this is happening. Nothing else but systemic racial abuse. Now, we've had examples of this in the past, but for whatever reason, people were always having an out. They had the ability to blame it on mental health. They had the ability to blame it on a rough upbringing. But this is not one of those cases. This was a man of sound mind and sound character, a police officer sworn to protect and serve, and yet somehow still violated every single right of George Floyd, and that led to his death. Why was it necessary to pin your knee down onto a man's neck once he's been restrained? Why is it necessary for you to continue your defiling acts when he's begging and he's saying out loud that he can't breathe? It's nothing but systemic racism, a mindset born out of centuries and centuries of what has become normal. It's become normal for people to view others as less than them. It's become normal for people to abuse from positions of power. It's become normal for certain people to see others as unworthy, unimportant, and unnecessary. The saddest part of all is that this isn't a situation that we can change overnight. It's not going to take 1 year. It's not going to take 2. It's going to take generations and generations of education, understanding, coexisting, and integration between everyone on earth to understand that we cannot live like this. Now, you might call these riots a justifiable manifestation of the African community's anger, desperation, frustration, and fear at the system that they've been forced to live in, under the rule of people who has seen them as unimportant, unnecessary, and unworthy of having the same social and economic status as themselves. Just as the world is banding together against putting even more economic power into China, I think we all need to band together and address the issues in our home countries about systemic racial abuse. In America, it's the African American community. Within my country, Australia, the Indigenous Australians, or Aboriginals as some of you may know, have always been under the oppression of people who are higher than them. And they've never been given the opportunity to attain valuable skills and experiences other than what they've been given at birth. In China, the Uyghur people are now being put in camps, isolated away from the world and having their identity stolen. And in general, how many people in the world view a refugee as a refugee and not someone who's trying to take their jobs? We have to take what's happening in America as a sign to look within ourselves. This isn't something that happened overnight, and this isn't something that happened over one man's death. This is something that came from years and years of racial abuse and discrimination, but it hasn't just been happening in America. In America, it's just the loudest. Everywhere else is just keeping it under wraps because we all like to point the finger at someone else. Now, of course, we can't riot and protest forever. It just has to change. It's not good to live in a world like this. We can't continue to do it. But the question is, how do we fix this? The answer is simple. The answer is just be a better person. The answer is to educate people. The answer is to be open-minded. And the answer is not to think that you're better than everyone else around you just because you got a couple of bucks or you're from a different part of the neighborhood. Once we understand that we're all going to die and that we're all going to be put in the ground and that 10 years from now, the name on your tombstone isn't going to be any more valuable, it's not going to be any more different, it's not going to be any more worthy, it's not going to be any more necessary or unnecessary than the guy who's buried next to you. Once we understand this, you start to realize that racism and discrimination are not worth being a part of. The answers to our problems are simple. The only difficult part is learning to accept that fact. I just hope we don't have to lose any more innocent lives for us to get the picture. Racism is bad, discrimination is evil, and it's not necessary at all.